Have you ever been in a situation where the person who once promised to love you forever suddenly felt like a stranger living under the same roof? I am asking you this because I know some of you watching right now have felt the silence of a cold marriage where the warmth of love disappears and the home becomes nothing more than four walls holding two people who barely speak. If you've ever asked yourself, why doesn't he care anymore, or what happened to the man I married, then stay right here, because what I am about to share with you is going to feel like a mirror reflecting the deepest questions you've been holding inside. This isn't just another story, it's a powerful reminder that behind every cold glance, every ignored message, every night spent in silence, there may be a hidden truth waiting to break free. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll have the exact answer you came here searching for, so don't even think of clicking away. Because if you do, you'll miss the moment that changes everything. You and I know that relationships don't fall apart overnight. No, it happens slowly, piece by piece, until one day you wake up and realize the person you married doesn't even look at you the same way anymore. That's exactly what happened to Emily. She thought she had it all: the dream wedding, the house she'd always imagined, and the kind of love story people post about on Instagram. But what she didn't realize was that beneath the perfectly filtered photos, her marriage was slowly turning cold, and by the time she saw the truth, it was already too late. Or at least, that's what she thought. And this is where I want you to lean in, because what happened next isn't what you'd expect, and it's the very reason you clicked on this video in the first place. You want to know what happens when a woman who has been ignored, dismissed, and forgotten finally decides to leave on what her husband does when he realizes he is about to lose her forever. Now, before I pull you into Emily's story, I want you to pause for a second and think about why you're here. Maybe it's curiosity, maybe it's because deep down you're tired of feeling like love is slipping away in your own life. Or maybe it's because you just can't resist the suspense of a story where the woman makes the move everyone secretly wants to see: she finally walks away. But here's the twist you won't see coming. When she tried to leave, the cold marriage you thought was dead suddenly turned into a fire that burned hotter than ever before. And isn't that what we all secretly want? To see the ice melt, the walls break, and the passion return. That's why you need to stay with me until the very end, because the answer we're looking for, the reason this marriage went from frozen silence to burning intensity, is going to be revealed, but only if you watch through to the last moment. Emily wasn't just any woman. She was the kind of wife who gave everything she had, believing that love wasn't about grand gestures, but about the little things: the good morning kisses, the late night talks, the way he used to hold her hand without her asking. But with time, those small things faded. First, the kisses stopped. Then the late night talks turned into late night silences. And eventually, even holding her hand seemed like too much for him. Her husband, Daniel, had grown distant, cold, unbothered, almost mechanical. He wasn't cruel, not in obvious ways, but in the way that hurts most: by acting as if she didn't exist. And if you've ever felt invisible in your own relationship, then you know that kind of pain digs deeper than any shouted word or slammed door ever could. And here's where the psychological part comes in, because you might be asking yourself right now, why do people change after marriage? Why does someone who once fought to win your love suddenly stop trying once they have it? It's because comfort, routine, and pride slowly start replacing effort, excitement, and appreciation. And that's exactly what happened to Daniel. He thought Emily would never leave, no matter how cold he became. But the thing is, when you push someone to their breaking point, when you leave them starving for love long enough, eventually they find the strength to walk away. And Emily was ready to do just that. Now, imagine this scene with Mule. Feel it as if you were standing right there. Emily, after months of trying to fix things, finally packs her bag. Her hands shake as she folds her clothes, her heart pounding as she zips the suitcase shut. She looks around the bedroom once filled with laughter and love, and now it feels like a stranger's space. Every picture on the wall feels like a lie, every memory like a wound. And in that moment, she whispers to herself, "I can't do this anymore." Can you feel it? The heartbreak, the courage it takes to walk away. That's what makes this story different, because what Emily doesn't know is that Daniel has been watching silently from the shadows of his own guilt and fear, and the moment he realizes she's about to leave, everything changes. But let me stop right here for just a second, because I want you to understand something important. You are not just watching Emily's story, you're living through it with her. Her doubts, her pain, her strengths, they're all reflections of what so many of us have faced in our own lives. And if you stay with me, if you allow yourself to walk this journey until the end, I promise you'll not only know what happened when she tried to leave, but you'll also walk away with answers that will change the way you see love, commitment, and even yourself. Because here's the truth: cold marriages don't just happen in stories. They happen in real homes, to real people, just like you and me. And if you've ever felt the chill of distance in your own life, then you know exactly why Emily's decision to walk away was the most powerful move she could make. But here comes the cliffhanger. You're not ready for what Daniel did next. You're not ready for the way he turned everything upside down, for the fire that came out of the ice. For the moment the man she thought she'd lost forever finally showed up in a way that left her completely breathless. And I'm telling you right now, you don't want to miss what happens after this, because this is where the real story begins. Emily's story didn't begin with silence, and that's what made her confusion so unbearable. In the early days, Daniel was the kind of man every woman dreamed about, the man who knew how to hold a conversation, who looked her in the eye as though she was the only one in the room, who remembered the little things she said even weeks later and surprised her with gestures that felt like love written into everyday life. He was charming, ambitious, and attentive. And when they walked down the aisle, Emily truly believed she was walking into forever. But marriage has a way of revealing truths you never expect, and over the years the little gestures faded until they vanished, completely replaced with an almost robotic routine that left Emily questioning if he ever truly loved her at all. She told herself it was just stress, that Daniel's growing distance was the result of long hours at work, endless meetings, and the pressure of his growing business, but deep down she sensed something darker, something that had nothing to do with exhaustion and everything to do with the choice he was making every day to keep her at arm's length. The house they shared was beautiful on the outside, the kind of picture-perfect home you'd see in a real estate ad, but inside it was filled with echoes instead of conversations, footsteps instead of laughter. Emily tried to fix it the way so many women do, through patience, forgiveness, and hope. She planned dinners, tried to spark conversations, left notes on his desk reminding him of the little moments they once treasured. Yet, the more she tried, the more he seemed to pull away, and that was when the first crack in her heart appeared. She wasn't just lonely, she felt invisible. And invisibility in a marriage is a wound deeper than betrayal, because it makes you feel like your existence doesn't even matter. And isn't that what so many people fear in their relationships? That one day the person they gave their life to will stop seeing them altogether. But here's where the story begins to twist in ways you won't expect. Emily wasn't alone in this silence. Friends started noticing the change, her family asked questions, and she brushed it off with excuses that sounded believable on the surface but carried no truth underneath. "He's just tired," she'd say. "It's a busy season at work," but in her heart, she knew the truth. Love was disappearing, and she was the only one fighting to save it. What Emily didn't realize, however, was that Daniel's silence wasn't just indifference, it was a mask, and behind that mask he was carrying secrets that would eventually break everything wide open. One evening, when she was folding laundry in the bedroom, Emily found something that made her stomach twist with unease. It wasn't scandalous, not in the obvious way that people always imagine, but it was unsettling nonetheless. A receipt tucked into his jacket pocket for a restaurant she had never been to, signed with a timestamp that didn't match the late nights he claimed to be working. She didn't say anything at first, because she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer to the questions swirling in her mind. But the discovery planted a seed of doubt that grew into suspicion, and suspicion turned into restless nights staring at the ceiling, wondering what else he wasn't telling her. And if you've ever been in that place, you know how it feels to lie awake, replaying every moment, searching for signs you might have missed. At the same time, something unexpected was happening in Emily's own life. Tired of waiting for Daniel's affection, she started pouring her energy into other things: her art, her friendships, her independence. For the first time in years, she began to rediscover who she was before the marriage, the woman who had dreams beyond being a wife. And the more she stepped back into herself, the more Daniel seemed to notice, though he didn't say it. He'd catch her leaving the house dressed with care, her smile brighter than it had been in months, and though he never admitted it, something in him shifted with the fear of losing control. He had taken her for granted, believing she would always be there, silent and patient. But what he didn't realize was that Emily was no longer waiting for him to change. She was preparing to change her own life. And here's the part that adds another layer to the mystery. Daniel wasn't as cold as he appeared, at least not inside. Behind his distance was a storm he couldn't bring himself to share, a storm tied to the very business he had built. He was facing pressures Emily couldn't imagine, debts and deals that threatened everything he had worked for. But instead of letting her in, instead of trusting her with his fears, he pushed her away, convincing himself that shielding her from his struggles was a form of protection. What he failed to see was that by locking her out, he was creating a wall so thick she could no longer reach him even if she tried. And isn't that how so many relationships break? Not from one big betrayal, but from 1,000 unspoken words, 1,000 missed chances to let someone in. Emily's world grew heavier with each passing day, but something inside her was shifting too. She began to imagine a life outside the marriage, a life where she didn't wake up every morning to cold silence. She told herself she deserved to be seen, to be loved, to be cherished the way she once was. And with each passing week, the idea of leaving grew less like a fantasy and more like a plan. She began to stash away small amounts of money, just enough to give herself options. She researched apartments online late at night when Daniel was asleep, her finger hovering over the contact button more than once before pulling back, her heart torn between fear and freedom. Meanwhile, Daniel wasn't blind to the shift in her. He noticed her laughter returning when she was with friends, the way she no longer begged for his attention, the quiet confidence in her voice when she spoke about her art. And though he never said a word, his silence now carried something else: attention. and unease, as though he could sense she was slipping away but refused to admit it out loud. Pride kept him frozen, fear kept him cold. But deep down he knew the woman who had once belonged to him was beginning to reclaim her life, and if he didn't act soon, he was going to lose her forever. And this is where you and I need to pause and breathe for a moment, because you're probably feeling the tension rising just as Emily did. The coldness of a marriage slipping away, the hidden secrets, the silent war between love and pride, it's all building towards something neither of them could see coming. And I promise you, if you stay with me until the end, you'll witness the moment that silence turns into fire. The moment Emily's decision to leave collides with Daniel's desperate attempt to stop her. But for now, the story is only beginning to unfold, and what waits around the corner will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and the power of walking away. Because as Emily tucked the suitcase back under the bed one last time, telling herself she'd leave tomorrow, she had no idea. Daniel was standing silently in the hallway, listening, his heart pounding with a fear he'd never felt before. And what he did next, well, that's the part you'll want to see for yourself. That night was different from all the others, though Emily didn't realize it when she slid the suitcase back beneath the bed and pressed her palms against the sheets, as if grounding herself to something she no longer believed in. Daniel stood in the hallway, hidden in the shadows, his chest rising and falling with a heaviness he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He had heard her whisper those words, the ones she thought no one else could hear. I can't do this anymore. For the first time, it wasn't just noise in his head, it wasn't something he could dismiss with the excuse of work or stress. This was his wife, the woman who had once been his entire world, preparing to leave, and the realization cracked something deep inside him. Pride had kept him silent, but fear had finally forced its way into his chest, and with fear came the need to act, though he had no idea that his decision would unleash a storm neither of them was prepared for. The next morning, Emily woke to find Daniel sitting at the edge of the bed, something he hadn't done in years. His expression was unreadable, a strange mixture of determination and guilt. She braced herself for the usual excuses, maybe even anger. But instead he reached into his pocket and handed her an envelope. Inside was something she didn't expect, papers from his office that detailed the collapse of a deal he had staked everything on. Papers that explained the weight he had been carrying in silence, the reason for his sleepless nights, and the growing wall between them. He confessed that the restaurant receipt she had found was real, but not for another woman. It was for a meeting with a potential investor who never showed, leaving him stranded with a taste of desperation and failure. For a moment, Emily's heart softened, because she finally understood the depth of the storm he had been drowning in. But just as quickly, another thought surfaced, one that left her trembling with unease. Why hadn't he trusted her enough to share this sooner? Why had he chosen to suffer alone while letting their marriage wither away? The answer, though unspoken, hovered between them like smoke. Daniel had always carried his pride like armor, believing that protecting her meant hiding the truth. But what he failed to see was that by excluding her, he had not protected their marriage, he had poisoned it. And yet, just when Emily thought the revelation might open a door to healing, another secret slipped through the cracks. Among the documents she sifted through was a signature she didn't recognize, a name scribbled across an agreement that didn't make sense. She asked him who it belonged to, and his silence told her everything she needed to know. There was more he wasn't telling her, something darker. Something that explained why his business wasn't just failing but entangled with people she had never even heard of. Suddenly, the marriage she thought was simply cold began to feel dangerous, as if walking away wasn't just about saving her heart but possibly about saving her entire future. As the hours passed, Emily couldn't shake the image of that unfamiliar name. Curiosity gnawed at her until she did something she had never done before. She called one of Daniel's closest friends, hoping to piece together what he wouldn't admit. What she learned nearly knocked the breath out of her. Daniel's business wasn't only struggling. He had made a deal with someone whose reputation was anything but clean, someone who had a history of destroying families and leaving partners in ruins. The realization hit her like a cold wave. She wasn't just trapped in a loveless marriage. She was tied to a man whose choices could unravel everything she had ever known. And suddenly, leaving wasn't just an act of courage, it was a matter of survival. But fate has a way of complicating things at the very moment you think you're ready to break free. That same evening, when Emily returned home, she found Daniel waiting for her, not distant, not cold, but fiery in a way she hadn't seen in years. He grabbed her hand, almost desperately, and told her he couldn't lose her, that everything he was doing, no matter how reckless it looked from the outside, was for them, for their future. And for a brief second, she felt the echo of the man she had fallen in love with, the one who once made her believe in forever. But the echo wasn't enough to erase the fear, because now she knew too much, and what she knew kept her awake long into the night. The twist came when Emily realized she wasn't the only one planning to leave. Hidden in the same drawer where she had once found the restaurant receipt, she discovered a small set of documents that revealed Daniel had been moving assets, shifting money into accounts she had never heard of, as though he was preparing for a future that didn't include her. The shock burned through her veins. Was he planning to disappear? to start over somewhere else without her? And if so, was his sudden attempt to win her back genuine, or was it simply a performance to keep her from seeing the truth until it was too late? This discovery didn't push Emily to walk away immediately, did something even more dangerous. It made her stay, but now with eyes wide open, watching his every move, questioning every word, piecing together the puzzle he refused to share. She began to play a quiet game of survival, pretending to be the same wife she had always been, but inside, she was sharper, stronger, and more determined than ever to uncover the truth. What she didn't realize, however, was that Daniel was watching her just as closely, sensing the change, feeling the shift in her energy, and preparing his own moves in a battle neither of them had expected when they said "I do." And here's where the stakes rise higher than either of them could have imagined. Emily isn't just facing the death of a marriage, she's stepping into a dangerous dance where love, betrayal, and survival are tangled together. The question isn't just whether she'll leave, but whether she'll make it out unscathed once the truth comes crashing down. And the moment she decides to finally confront him, to demand the answers he's been hiding, is the very moment the story takes a turn you won't see coming. Because when she walked into the living room that night, ready to demand the truth, Daniel was already waiting with someone else sitting beside him. A stranger whose presence would change everything she thought she knew about her marriage. The stranger sitting in their living room wasn't the kind of figure Emily expected to see in the middle of her unraveling marriage. At first glance, the woman looked ordinary, dressed in a tailored blazer, her expression calm but unreadable. Yet there was something about the way she crossed her legs and stared directly at Emily that sent a chill down her spine. Daniel sat stiffly beside her, his jaw tight, his hands clasped together as if he had rehearsed this moment and still wasn't ready for it. For a second, Emily thought the worst, that this was another woman, someone he had been seeing behind her back, but the atmosphere was different. There was no trace of intimacy between them, no guilty glances, no secret affection. Instead, there was a heaviness, an almost businesslike seriousness that made Emily's heart race with confusion. Daniel cleared his throat, and the words that followed left Emily frozen. The woman wasn't a lover, she was an associate, someone tied to the very deal Daniel had kept hidden from her. Someone whose presence in their home meant the secrets he had been carrying were even darker than she imagined. Her name was Evelyn, and though Daniel tried to soften the introduction by saying she was here to help straighten things out, it was immediately clear that Evelyn wasn't a helper, she was a force. Someone who held leverage over Daniel, someone who looked at Emily not as a wife but as collateral. The realization slammed into her: this wasn't just about a cold marriage anymore. She was standing in the middle of a conflict far bigger than their relationship, a conflict that might swallow them both if she wasn't careful. Emily tried to mask her panic, but her instincts screamed that something was wrong. Evelyn's questions came fast, subtle but invasive, about the house, the finances, even about Emily's own routines. She answered cautiously, watching Daniel for clues, but he kept his gaze fixed on the floor, his silence a betrayal in itself. That was when Emily understood the depth of it. Daniel wasn't just hiding stress from work, he was entangled with people who saw him as a pawn, and now, by extension, they saw her the same way. It wasn't only love at stake anymore. It was survival, reputation, even safety. And yet, beneath the fear, something else burned inside her, the urge to fight back, to take control of the story that had been slipping out of her hands for years. The unexpected twist here wasn't just Evelyn's presence, but the revelation that Daniel had already made promises that involved Emily without her knowledge. Promises that tied her name, her signature, her future, into agreements she never saw. He had forged ahead, convincing himself he could fix everything before she noticed, but now it was too late. Every document she skimmed, every offhand remark Evelyn made, confirmed that Emily wasn't just living in a cold marriage, she was living inside a trap carefully disguised as love. And the irony was brutal. For months she had believed she was invisible, unimportant, forgotten by the man she once loved, when in reality she was central to a web of choices that could not unravel without her. The tension in the room was suffocating, and as Evelyn finally stood to leave, she paused at the door, her eyes locking on Emily with a faint, cryptic smile. "Sometimes," she said softly, almost like a warning, "you don't realize your value until someone else does." The words clung to Emily like smoke, lingering long after the door closed behind her. She turned to Daniel, desperate for answers, but he had nothing, only more silence, more hesitation, more excuses. And that was the moment Emily's patience shattered. For the first time in years, she raised her voice, demanding to know why he had dragged her into a world she never chose, why he allowed their marriage to freeze over while he played dangerous games with strangers. Her anger wasn't just about neglect anymore, it was about betrayal on a scale she couldn't yet measure. But Daniel's reaction shocked her more than his silence ever had. Instead of fighting back, instead of shouting or storming out, he broke, his voice cracked, his hands trembled, and he confessed that he had been protecting her all along, or at least he thought he was. The deals, the lies, the distance, it had all been his way of keeping her shielded from the storm. But in the process he had turned into the very thing she hated most, someone who locked her out of her own life. His confession wasn't the resolution she expected. It was an earthquake, shaking the fragile foundation of what little trust remained. Because even though his words carried guilt, they also carried a truth she couldn't ignore. He wasn't finished with this world he had entangled them in. And if she left now, she might not walk away as easily as she thought. The marriage that had once felt like ice was now on fire, but not in the way she imagined. It wasn't passion rekindled, it was chaos ignited, flames of fear and betrayal burning hotter with each passing moment. And Emily realized with bone-deep certainty that the choice before her was no longer just about love. It was about freedom, survival, and discovering whether Daniel was a man worth saving or just another anchor pulling her deeper into a storm she might never escape. And as the night stretched into silence once again, Emily made a decision she didn't say out loud, a decision that would change everything in the chapters to come. She would no longer wait for answers to be handed to her. She would find them herself, even if it meant exposing truths Daniel had spent years trying to bury. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Evelyn's resource return would come sooner than expected, and with it a revelation that would twist this story into something far more dangerous than a broken marriage.